Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors Advanced Self-Publishing Salon with me, Joanna Penn, and Orna Ross. Hi, Orna.
Hi, Joanna, and hello, everyone. Last show of
Hello.
the year.
Yes, I was going to put my Christmas hat on, but I decided that was, we're still at the beginning of December. We've still got however many days, like 25 days or something until 2021.
Yes.
Very exciting. So today we're talking about lessons learned from author setbacks, failures, and mistakes. And this is something we're going to have some fun with this today because we haven't actually talked. We always both talk about things we've learned over the time, but we've never put them all together into one big show on all the mistakes we've done. So we hope you find it useful today. But before we get into that, of course, we are writers first, and we like to start with some news and updates. So, Orna, what's going on with Ally?
So there is a lot happening at Ally at the end of the year. As always, we are in the middle of a campaign issue around Audible, which some people will be familiar with. I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but if you follow the hashtag AudibleGate, you will see what's going on there. So that is essentially things need to change, practices that need to change at Audible, and Audible's rating having been downgraded from obviously approved for a long time as the major, ACX, I should say, partner member through which self-published books are made available on Audible. ACX was for a long time an approved partner member. A while ago, an investigation started and that was downgraded to pending, and now it's caution. So there are lots of issues, not going to go into them, don't have time. Follow Susan May, author, if you're interested in this, because she is the person who is working like a Trojan all around the clock to connect with other authors and talk about what's going on. And if anybody has any experience, anybody who does know what I'm talking about, if you have experiences that you would like to share with us, please let us know at audiblegate@allianceindependentauthors.org. Also at Ally, we have our latest member magazine is out with Cory Doctorow on our cover, which we're thrilled about. Cory's done a great article for us about copyright and his vision of Creative Commons. We also have the Publishers Association giving the opposite side of that debate and providing a copyright infringement portal for our members to replace Blasty, which was a service which kind of became redundant. And of course, you and I were looking at the whole issue of AI for a submission to the UK government.
Yes.
So what have you been? Yeah, we're going to talk about that on another show another time.
Yes.
But aside from that, what were you up to this month?
Well, yes, just to mention the AI thing, we had lockdown. If people are not in the UK, we had lockdown for basically the whole month of November. And my intention was to write, I just said, I'm going to write another book because I finished Tree of Life, my last novel, which is actually out this week, but I finished it early. So I was like, I know, I'll write another book. So I wrote Your Author Business Plan, which is out this week, and we're going to have our next show will be on planning, and because you've got a whole planning thing too. But you encouraged me to put my thoughts on AI down into another book. So complete nut. I mean, you can see it's really thin, and that's with all the back matter and stuff. But
it's really packed.
It's packed with ideas.
Yeah, it really is.
And I'm encouraged. We're not going to go into the topic, obviously, but I'm very encouraged by almost the ability to get out a book that fast, because it was going to be a podcast and I spoke to you on the Thursday and you said, no, you should make it into a book. And I published it Sunday night and essentially released it on the Monday morning. And I was very nervous about that, but I went through as much of my process as possible. So what I would say to people is especially if you have a technical topic or a time specific topic that you want to get out, it can be done. And this is the beauty of self-publishing, of being an independent author. You don't have to wait a year or 2 years or however long. You can actually just put things out, and they can be, I then got editor, cover designer, and I had done a lot of that, use Pro Writing Aid, use Canva as a cover, but then kind of, updated it that week. But it's great when you can do stuff that fast. So I wanted to encourage people. It doesn't have to be like a magnum opus 70,000 words. You can publish a short story with some back matter in print, and that's really cool. You can hand it out. So that was some encouragement with people, and I'm now
Yeah, I think that's really important, and also there are also lots of reasons not to publish a book always. And
yes.
I think the one that kind of when I was trying to persuade you, the thing that I said was, a lot of books going up on Amazon every week that are because you kind of felt you needed it to be bigger and you needed it to be more complete, and that it will be out of date very quickly, which were all really good reasons not to do it. But actually, there were more reasons to do it. And I would like to say as well, I'm glad we're talking about mistakes and failures today, because while some people will find what you just said encouraging, other people will find what you just said daunting. Like, I finished my fiction book early and I put out a book in basically a couple of weeks and a couple of days. Yeah. A lot of work was done on that before, of course, because you've written these massive
about 4 years. 4 years worth of work.
4 years of work, exactly. But yeah, not everybody is able to do things as fast, folks, and you don't have to either. That's also an important point to make, I think.
No, that is very true. And yeah, horses for courses. I've certainly never done that before, but it is very interesting. Now I'm doing some narration, and it's definitely it's been one of those weird years, but it's been one of the most productive for me ever because I've had nothing else to do except work. So that's good. So what about you? What have you been up to?
I have been the ally guides that I'm personally involved in. I have been reworking and updating. We update our guides usually at this time of the year. So doing that, and actually reading your AI book had an influence on our Self-Publishing 3.0. And again, we'll cover that when we come to doing the show, but that has been almost completely revamped, really. And that's with the editor at the moment and shortly going up. So yeah, as you know, it's been my year of nonfiction, and I'm really looking forward now to January starting back on fiction again.
Way, I imagine. Okay, so we're going to get into the topic now, which is our lessons learned from author setbacks, failures, and mistakes. So we're just going to start with some definitions. So Orna, what do you mean by these words?
Well, a failure, I think, a creative failure is when you set a goal or creative intention and it doesn't actually go the way you intended it to go. And that can be through a setback or a mistake. So, for example, your first book doesn't make you a millionaire, which some authors, yes, I know, but you'd be shocked by how many authors think it will. And or you read back your book and you're shocked to find that it's full of errors. Maybe your editor wasn't a good hire. You think a series will take you, this is mine, you think a series will take a year to do, and 5 years later it still hasn't arrived. So that's failures. Setbacks is when you expect something to happen and it doesn't, but for an outside reasons or a change to your conditions. So say COVID would be the perfect example. Obviously this year, and all that happens stops your travels, can't do what you normally do. An unexpected death or illness in the family, something, you have a business partner who lets you down, that will be a setback. So the idea is it's outside of you, it's other people. Mistakes are something you do yourself, comes from inside you, could be conscious or unconscious, but essentially you do something that you really shouldn't have done and you have to drop or reverse your original intention. So choosing the wrong tool or tech, doing an ad campaign that leaves you out of pocket, a bad hire, those kinds of things, they're mistakes. And I think the most important thing to say about all of the above is that they are learning fuel.
Yeah, and also that I like the way you've defined these things, because I don't even like the word failure. I feel like failure is a bad thing, has negative connotations. And at the time, all of these things can feel awful. And we've all been through many of these things. And, certainly the COVID panic, that fear we all felt earlier in the year, that kind of dulls a little over time. But that we all go through these things, but I don't like the word failure because it sounds so negative, whereas I try and reframe all of these things as, how can I learn and go forward and move forward and do better in the future? Because we only progress by learning, and we can do all the podcasts we do and all the books we do, and but people still make the same mistakes we do. And when we continue to make the same mistakes, so that's just life. Anything else before we actually get into the details?
Yes, I think that is the most important point, that sort of creative failure becomes fodder for success. So the creative way to deal with failure is, what can I learn from this? Where did it go wrong specifically? How do I make sure, especially the ones that we keep making over and over?
Yes.
There comes a point that you absolutely, and the sooner that point comes, the better. And sometimes we just do keep making the same mistakes again. And in order to develop your creative business, in order to develop your books as well, and how you write and what you write, you need to grow as a person. And that's the role of these mistakes and failures. They often come as little kind of pebbles, first of all, and then if you don't listen, it becomes like a big stone, and then it's a rock, and then it's a great big boulder. And at some point, you have to take the learning. So, if you can do it while it's still a pebble, that's good. You can't always, though. But you've got to kind of take it and not allow yourself to be crushed by it. That's the point. Don't let it lead. You reshape and reframe it. And it is in the act of doing that you grow as a person, as a writer, as a publisher, and as a business owner. And that's why it's so very important. And I think why we're doing this show, and why it's really important for us as authors to share our failures and our mistakes, because there's so much smoke and mirrors in publishing. You see the success, you see the person who's done really well, you see, people don't tend to talk enough, I think, about the things that go wrong in the background. So yeah, that's what we're here to do. Be real.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just on the lessons learned, it comes down to sort of that know thyself from the Greek temple of Delphi. Every single mistake you make, if you can learn something more about yourself, it's going to help you next time. So we're going to talk about some of the big stuff, like the really, really big epic fails. Let's just call them epic fails. And then we'll get into some of the more granular stuff, which people might definitely recognize. So I'm going to start because I have a particularly epic fail on both a business level, a financial level, and a personal level. So back in, I can't remember what year it was, like 2002, I was living in New Zealand. I was married for the first time to a scuba dive instructor and a boat skipper. And I was an IT consultant. And basically I was like, let's start a scuba diving business. What a great idea. That would be a really good thing to do. And without knowing anything, I'm an action orientated person, this. So as soon as I have an idea, I'm like, right, do it. So I was a highly paid consultant. So we went into it. We set up hiring a boat, equipment, scuba diving equipment, insurance, marketing, staff, not just a skipper, but, dive masters, fuel, the cost of fuel. And New Zealand weather is really up and down. So essentially, we did have a business for about a month, which was incredibly expensive. And also then my husband left me for another scuba diving instructor. And there's no blame. We're not going to go into marriage issues. But the fact is that this failure of knowing myself in so many ways led to it costing me in so many ways. But the positive and upside of this failure is what I learned is I never want to have a business that is dependent on weather, is dependent on the price of fuel, the vagaries of employees, on, my husband not being reliable, on high fixed costs and crazy variable costs and risk. I mean, scuba diving is a risky business. It was dependent on a physical location, and everything about my business now, which is actually a highly successful business, is due to that failure. I learned that I wanted to have low costs, low fixed, low variable costs. I wanted to be location independent. I wanted to have no employees, no physical assets. I didn't need to insure a boat or people potentially dying. And so that epic failure shaped my business now. And the failure of my first marriage led to my wonderful second marriage to Jonathan. And the lessons I learned about myself in that marriage helped me with this one. So I'm grateful for those mistakes, and what I learned has meant that I'm more successful now because of learning those lessons. And I don't talk about this stuff that much, but I wanted to, before we get into like, oh, my cover design was a bit crap, I wanted to kind of go with the biggest epic fail that led to possibly my biggest success.
Fantastic. Well, I think that was quick learning, because I've heard so many people say that it's on their third business that things actually go, it often takes number three, and that whole thing of third time lucky. I too had an epic business fail back in the early 2000s, but I'm not going to kind of repeat that, because it was in many ways a similar sorts of lessons that you're talking about. Mine was within publishing, and the failure was because of the business partner kind of arrangement that didn't work out. But I learned a huge amount in that also about what I did and did not want from a business. And at the time, the kinds of things that I said I wanted weren't even really available. And it was the want and the desire came before the means, which only really came with digital self-publishing. My biggest mistake, I think, is one that I wanted to talk about, a mistake that there is a tendency to keep on making. And for me, it would be a tendency to overwork. And that led me in my 40s into burnout, really. Not that I felt I was burnt out, but I hit a cancer wall, which a lot of people who overwork do. It's a common kind of personality sort of thing. And are they related? Who knows? You can't say for sure. But certainly what I do know, that the lessons that I learned then I carried forward hugely. And connected to overwork, I always think, is a kind of an undervaluing of the self. And I think we see that hugely in the author community, where we undervalue our work. We don't read contracts. We give ourselves away. We don't charge appropriately. We don't set up the business in a way that's actually going to be profitable. There's so many ways in which we can undervalue ourselves. And I think that's very related to this tendency. Yeah, so it basically comes down to, the idea of net worth and self-worth being in some way equivalent. And for me, coming out of that was very much, it's why I invest so much time still in the whole idea of planning and creative planning, the kind of planning that works for me, because I can't do very rigid, mechanized, what normally people think of when they think of planning. And I think that's why I'm still so connected to it, because it is very connected to those mistakes that I tended to make. So now I have a much more ordered, and I understand the value of creative rest and creative play, and how vital they are, not just to the job and to the work, but to having a good life and all of that. So
well, I just come back on that, because I think also we can learn from each other, because we're very different people. Like, we're good friends, but we're very different people, and we do things in very different ways. And yeah, even like last week, when clearly I've been overworking, I really have been. Like, I did like 100-hour week or something, and I got to that point where I just want to throw everything in. And I've talked to you about this many times over the years, and you've said to me many times, well, you just rest, duh. You don't have to cancel everything and just burn the whole bridges down. You can just take a rest. And so, yeah, I sleep a lot. So I have been sleeping like 10 or 11 hours a night for the last few days. And so, but I hear you talking to me in my head, obviously, when I hit these points, because of the lesson you learned. So I definitely had reached burnout in my corporate job back in the year 2000. So I have experienced that, but I feel like we can learn these lessons from each other, and in the community, we can share these lessons and hopefully avoid, like, I hope I don't have to learn that same lesson again as you did. I mean, obviously.
Exactly. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Kind of getting it. If you don't give yourself the time to actually observe what's going on with the mistake, if you just kind of go from, and you recoil and you throw yourself into action again without absorbing what it actually means, there's a kind of danger in that. And then there's the opposite, I think, mistake, if it can be called that. It's not really, it doesn't really fall into failure, setback, or mistake as such, but it is something that happens, which is that you can't. It's the opposite to overwork, is that you can't get going. You're overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that's coming at you, or you can't integrate it, or you just can't get going. There's kind of inability to work, analysis paralysis, maybe, or just, that feeling of being caught in the headlights and not being able to do anything. And I think the recipe is actually quite similar. It is still to kind of rest and play, step away, and then, absorb what's being said and what is actually going on for you. Because I think we talk a huge amount in the indie community about the outer surface stuff, the sales and the and what's going on when it's going well, or even if it's not going well, or I didn't get my words out. It's very often at that level of production that we're talking and thinking. But there's all that deeper stuff that we tend to connect just with our writing, but it's actually very connected to our publishing and our business as well. And the more you can kind of get to know yourself in whatever activity you're doing that you're not happy about, it's that inner voice that tells you, I'm overworking, or that business partner isn't really working out, but you just ignore it and you keep on going and going. That's where the mistake turns into the epic fail.
The epic fail, yeah. And just on setbacks, since you mentioned that kind of freezing, I would say that paralysis, I definitely experienced that this year with COVID, and I think a lot of people have, and I know people who are still in paralysis, in that freeze mode, which has a lot to do with obviously the fear and very valid health concerns that people have. But so I wanted to just recognize that sometimes that freeze is a response to fear, and we all have to find ways to get beyond that. And I think for me it was about 3 weeks back in March, April, and I talked to our mutual friend Mark McGuinness, who really helped me shift my mindset, because that's what it was for me. It was shifting my mindset to move out of that fear and freeze mode back into action. But that I learned a lot about myself through that, because I never thought I was that person who would be stopped by fear, and I was. And so I've now experienced that. So if anyone else is feeling that setback, there are ways to get through that, like there are any of these things. And I guess, as you're saying, the first thing is be gentle with yourself and take that step back and learn things and then move back into it.
I think fear is really it. This is the core thing for everything we're talking about here. Almost all the mistakes we make are as a result of being afraid of something, afraid that we won't get the book out in time, afraid that we look like an idiot if such and such doesn't, it is some kind of fear that is generally driving us to make a mistake. And then with the setbacks, the stuff that comes from outside, it's the fear of that, and the sense that it has more power than you have. And I think you said the most important thing of all, actually, there when you spoke about talking to Mark, is get help. Talk to somebody who can actually help you. Don't just kind of sit there feeling that it is inevitable, or framing. We can be really brilliant at creating excuses and explanations and causes and reasons as to why we are where we are. We can be, intensely creative about that, rather than getting our creative juices going on the books. So getting help, the help you need, and the right kind of help, I think is really important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk about some more common, although I think all those things are common, but these are super common things that people do in self-publishing, and these are definitely mistakes. So I'm going to start with one of my biggest mistakes again, or on the small scale, my biggest little mistakes. And that is, I wrote my first nonfiction book when I was living in Australia. This was between 2006, 2008. So this was before the Kindle went mainstream. Smashwords was around, but, you could only publish in the US on the Kindle. And so I decided to self-publish. I was in the speaking community, and everyone did it in the speaking community. So I wrote the book, and I worked with a local printer, and I paid upfront for 2,000 copies of my book, which was called How to Enjoy Your Job or Find a New One, my catchy title of my first book. And there's a picture I have of me standing there in front of all these boxes in our living room, and I'm like, I'm so proud of this. Look at all this. And it was about 15 minutes before I realized that I had 2,000 books in my living room. And my wonderful husband was so supportive. But of course, what I realized after about 15 minutes was how do I get them out my living room into the hands of other people? Like, how do you do that? And the classic mistake of thinking that you publish it and they will come. And this is something we see every single day in the community. And all authors, in fact, think that writing the book is the end of it, and in fact it's just the beginning. So I did, and then I was like, right, I must get in the paper and get on TV, and thus I did those things. I was on national TV in Australia, I was in the papers all over the country, and I sold 200 copies of my book, and 1,800 copies went to the landfill about a year later. And because then I learned about digital publishing, I learned about blogging, online marketing. So again, that mistake, which cost me probably, let's say about 5,000 Aussie dollars, that cost me, plus the design and stuff like that. But again, that mistake led me into learning about blogging, podcasting, online publishing, online marketing, and has underpinned making way more money than I ever spent. So again, that mistake led to success.
Brilliant. Personally, I think you should have kept the 1,800. They could be collector's items now. You could flog them for
well, they're still all secondhand on Amazon.
Oh yeah, of course. Yes, of course. Very good. Yeah, and I think linked into that, and an important thing that I see all the time, and that I tried myself, but I started out with this, was the idea that you could, it's linked to that you could get somebody else to market your book for you. It's the question I probably ask most often every week is, who does book marketing for you? And that's not something that an indie author can do until you know how to do it yourself. Then you're in a position to hire somebody else. When you don't know how to market books, trying to hire somebody doesn't work out. And I know that because I tried to hire a few people along the way, and it just was an absolute complete waste of money. So yeah, that's just coming in on the back of yours there a little bit. My mistake that I wanted to talk about was I know a lot of authors have previously published work, so people who have already published with another publisher, an indie publisher, a trade publisher somewhere along the line, and then you get your files back and you put it back out there again and you think it's fine, but on the way you make a few little changes. So that's what I did with mine, but I thought, well, it's been edited already, and I just made some small changes, it's fine, and I put it back out, and of course the changes I made hadn't been edited, and the reviews are there too, and will be there till my dying day. So yeah, I think that was a big mistake. And I think undervaluing editing, that's why I'm bringing this one up. I think undervaluing editing is a mistake that every single author makes at the start. You don't understand how important it is to get a professional edit. You think your stuff, you're too close to it. You think that you're good on the grammar and you're good on the this and that. It's all completely irrelevant. Every single author needs, and I know it's expensive when you're starting out and all of that, but I just wanted to double, triple underline that one. It's always a mistake to forego the editing, and it's always a good thing to get the best editing you can afford.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, well, no, maybe not always, but you will often spend the most money on editing at the beginning. Like I think I hired 4 different editors for my first novel, Pentecost, which became Stone of Fire, because you just learn so much. But yeah, both of us use editors, and they're just fantastic, and you just get better every time. Okay, so I've got another one, which is rip-offs. So again, when nobody knows who you are, so winding back again to 2008, I had no website, no audience, no online sales. There was no Amazon, KDP print, CreateSpace I think hadn't been bought yet. It was still a separate company, all of this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, how do I get people to notice this book? And so along with doing the PR and stuff, I paid for a chapter in a compilation book. And this scam is still around now. Now, it is not a scam to have a chapter in a book that is A good book. Let's put it that way. I mean, there are lots of anthologies. I mean, I've got short stories in anthologies. I've written essays for nonfiction books. That's not what I mean. This was a classic, pay $3,000 and we'll just put your chapter into this book and we'll put a famous name on the front who they just got a chapter from them too. And I'm not going to mention names. This was over a decade, but I still see these things out now. And again, what was the point? And then, of course, the deal is that you end up buying 500 copies of that book. So it looks like it's successful, whereas actually all the people in the book bought the book and then try and flog it. And again, they end up in the landfill. And I see this issue. And also I paid for a review, and not on a bad site. This is, again, a site that is still reputable. But again, what does that do? That does absolutely nothing. So you end up paying these chunks of money, like hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, pounds, for things that don't actually get you anywhere. Whereas what you should be doing is paying for better cover design, better editing. Those are the things to pay for, not paid reviews, paid compilation books.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that a lot of Ally's work goes into pointing out good services and bad services. And when you start out at the beginning, you can't actually tell the difference. You just don't know. And as you say, there are some big brand names that are associated with some services that are really not great. So if you are in doubt, and especially if you're at the beginning and you're not sure what's a good service, what's a bad service, John Doppler's book, Choosing the Best Self-Publishing Services, is an Ally guide that will help you. And if you're an Ally member, you can download it, the ebook version, free in the member zone. Just go to guidebooks. It's really important. That guide will also teach you how to evaluate a service, so you know whether it is a decent service or not, because that's at the beginning. It's impossible, actually, because Google as well really doesn't help, because most of the services that are popping up at the top of your search engine are actually not great. So I mean, not all, but certainly there are some terrible services that will come up if you Google self-publishing advice, or so yeah, be careful.
Can I just add on that, is the date on your search is really important to always use the date. I mean, you and I, people could listen to conversations with you and I from even 3 years ago, even 1 year ago. And there are companies, for example, you mentioned one earlier, ACX, who a year ago we would have been like, yay, great. And now we're like, caution. And this is, and they've got me on their homepage. And, so this is the thing. If there are companies that we would have talked about personally years ago, or on my website or on the Ally website, that are, we cannot police our history on the internet a lot of the time. So please, everyone, check that it is a recent thing that people are using. Also, people regularly use quotes from me and my book, and probably you as well, on their websites, even when we've got nothing to do with it. And again, we might not know. So both of us welcome emails saying, just checking, did you really recommend that service? Do you still recommend that service? Because I think that's important too, isn't it? Things change, and what was great suddenly might not be great.
Absolutely. And some of those rogue services are pretty unscrupulous. So Ally approved partner badges turn up all over the internet on services that are absolutely appalling. So always check our actual listings to make sure that somebody is an approved service, because you can't.
That can happen. Right. Tell us about your book cover disaster.
Oh yes, my book cover. Now I've changed my covers lots on lots of my books across the years. I'm not talking about when you're due a refresh, or when your branding changes, or when everything begins to look different. I'm just talking about just getting it wrong, because and this is the mistake that I made, that I see people making too literal about what's in the book, rather than trying to convey the emotion of the book. So it was Blue Mercy. It was one of my standalone novel, and it's a mother-daughter story. And I went for a picture of the mother and the daughter on the book, and The daughter in my book is overweight and kind of surly and all of that. And I went for somebody who kind of looked, Jane, my brilliant cover designer who works with you as well, did everything that I asked for and gave me exactly what I wanted. And it was terrible. It was a terrible cover in terms of it did not sell because nobody
Such
wanted.
a good book, by the way. Great book. Terrible cover. I remember it well.
It was just, nobody wants a book with an unattractive surly person on the front of it, on that kind of book. So now it has. Jane did the redo for me, and it just has this woman tastefully disappearing into the rain with an umbrella over her, conveying the emotional tenor of the book. So that is the mistake with your book. Don't worry if your heroine on her big night out has a blue dress and the cover has a lady in a red dress. That's not important. Does it actually get the emotional feeling of the book, and does it match the genre? Is it contemporary? Will it look right when set beside comparable books? They're the things to think about. Yes. So that mistake, it didn't last long as I watched the sales plummet.
But what's great about that issue is that it's easily fixed. Although we say easily fixed, both of us, I've got their desecration. That's like my third group of covers for those books. I still don't really understand what those books are. So it's really difficult sometimes, especially as independent authors, but don't think that traditional publishing gets it right. I mean, there's frequent recoverings of books and retitling and re-author namings. So it's not just us. This is a regular, and let's call it, it's like a little mistake that's easily fixed. And related to that, another issue around branding, and this is perhaps again not valuing ourselves enough or not thinking big enough, but I inevitably set up a website called howtoenjoyyourjob.com, which I don't own anymore. Don't go there. It's like a Chinese site now. But setting up a website around your first book is another classic mistake. So you think, I just need to set up, the URL for my book, and like miraculously that's going to mean anything these days with multi-millions of websites out there. It really doesn't matter that much. Like, you do SEO, search engine optimization, in other ways. But what you have to do is think bigger. So it took me 3 more websites before I settled on the creativepenn.com. And of course, I own tons of websites now because I have loads of them. But it's thinking about branding around your theme, like the Creative Penn, but it's also my name, Penn, obviously, and you've got ornaross.com. And in the end, most of us settle on branding by name. So jfpenn.com, my fiction name. Because inevitably you end up writing more books. And if you only have one book, then you're just not going to do this. Generally, you're not going to do this as a career, or you've got other things like speaking or other things. But so what I would say is that's the mistake. The mistake is building a website on the name of your first book.
Very common, and Facebook pages also people do, and then they end up with 3 or 4
800 of them,
one for each book, and their audience completely dispersed. And getting the name at first. And then another mistake that I have made that I see other people making too is bad hires. So not being careful enough, being in a hurry, again, afraid it won't come out, that fear that, it won't be done in time. So just going on Upwork or wherever and just getting somebody that seems. Upwork is great if you take the time. What I'm trying to say is the mistake is hiring without due diligence, without really taking your time and working out. You will save so much time in the end rather than hiring somebody who is not great. Now, sometimes there's nothing you can do up front, but the mistake I'm talking about that I have made and that I've seen many people make is taking on an editor too quickly, taking on any hire and not really going into it. And Chris Ducker's book is good on this, I think.
Very good.
I forget the name of it. Do you recall the name offhand? I think it's called virtual assistants,
Yeah,
or
something
something
like
like that.
virtual assistant or virtual
Yeah,
outsourcing or something like that. But I think you're right. And actually, I learned from Chris there, like, I'm classic mistake. I just want another me. Just give me one person who can be me and I can give them stuff. But that's not you that's not how it works. You have to have lots of people doing their individual things. And I think that bad hire, you almost have to do one because you have to learn how to let someone go. And that's awful, but you have to do it. And you end up going, oh, I'm really sorry. Look, I'm so sorry. It's my fault. Like, I did all of that. And it's now I'm a lot harder about, this is exactly what I want. And we have a trial period. And, I'm doing it right now actually with somebody new, and, just said, look, no, nothing personal. We just have a trial period and then see how it goes, friendly,
yeah.
happy.
It's really important because sometimes it's not even about the skills, it's about
Yeah.
the fit. Somebody that I had to part ways with, she was really good at her job, but we just, every time I got an email from her, I was feeling tense and anxious because she was kind of, she was the boss of me. I felt I was running around to kind of give her things, and she kept coming up with suggestions and stuff like that. So she was actually overqualified for the job, which is something also you find a lot in publishing people, and also people who want to be writers who are not actually devoted and dedicated to what they actually do. They're writers who are doing something on. I'm not saying that writers, there are people who both write and provide a service, and they're excellent. But there are also people who really want to be writers and who are doing a bit of editing on the side, and who aren't fully qualified, who think because they have written a book that it gives them the skills to be an editor, and it doesn't, and so on all the way through. So the only way is probably is make that mistake and find out. But if you can, we will put Chris's book in the show notes so you can actually take a look at that if you're thinking of hiring someone soon.
Yeah, great. So before we finish, we also just wanted to acknowledge that sometimes it might not even be a mistake, but it's something that we need to stop doing and give up. So these are things. So I'm going to say, for me, I co-wrote 3 sweet romance books with my mum as Penny Appleton. And I really, really wanted to help my mum start a new career. I did it with the best intentions. I did help her co-write those 3 books, of which, we are proud. But at the end of the day, Orna will remember this. I'm like, I hate this. I'm not a sweet romance. I'm like dark fantasy, like graveyards and stuff. We're just so different, me and my mum, in that way. We're very similar in other ways, but so I had to, and it was a terrible conversation. I felt I had all the heart palpitations. I had to go to her and say, Mum, I can't do this anymore. I cannot write this. It's not my thing. But in the end, we had a really good conversation, and we now think about it. She's been on my podcast and we talked about it in public if anyone wants to hear that conversation. So now she's written 2 more entirely on her own, and she's now off riding her own bike. I helped her onto the tandem for a bit, and now she's off riding her bike. But I had to let that go. It wasn't a mistake. It was just, I had to stop doing it for my own mental health and before we killed each other. So that was one of those things. What about you?
Yeah, mine is a more generic thing of a project that just didn't come together. So, and again, it was born out of that mistake I talked about earlier of underestimating the time and undervaluing my own time and all the other things I was doing, and not planning carefully enough, and the tendency to take on too much. So I wanted to do a nonfiction series on the creative process and how it is used not just in writing but in life, and how there is an equivalence there, a sort of a uniform process that works throughout. And it came to me as a 7-book series, and I got the covers done and I put it out there, and I thought, because it was all there and it still is all there, but for some reason that series has just never come together for me. And it's just, the worst thing about it is it's a terrible breach of trust with your readers who are interested and express their interest and sign up for your emails and all of that, and then you don't deliver. It's horrible. So, you know, what I will say is I kept on trying. And then earlier this year, you said to me, maybe just let it go. Stop. So I did. And the relief, I cannot even begin to tell you, you know, so when you let something go that isn't working, you know, I kept delaying rather than deleting. And when I pressed the delete button, it was such a relief. Now what I've done is taken a whole load of that stuff and put it in an author-based planning schedule, which is, you know, all there and working really well for me, and have a lovely creative planning workshop now set up with authors and able to work on that and put it out there in that much smaller, more contained, tiny, focused way. And that focus feels fabulous. I'm really absolutely loving it. So sometimes, you know, we tend to say, okay, I'll delay it, I'll do it later. But just deleting, I think, is a tremendous relief. And I think we're all probably carrying projects around, pet projects, that maybe pressing delete might be a good thing to do.
Yeah, and that circles right back to what we said at the beginning around knowing yourself and trusting that that intuition is right. And maybe sometimes it takes a friend to remind you of that. And, you know, that can really help too. But so people listening, you know, as we come to the end of this year, but also just thinking back over your author career, or even your personal life, if you want to take it, you know, in a bigger sense, take some time to reflect on mistakes, failures, setbacks, and consider what you learned from them and how they've played a part in your success. Even as I don't know, I'm reframing the pandemic year. Obviously, some terrible things have happened and are still happening, but we can't live in that depression all the time. It's like, how can we reframe this? What are the brilliant things that are going to come out of this year? And, you know, there are so many things that are happening because of the pandemic. So I think that's part of it too. How can we reframe what might have been difficult at the time into something positive for our future? So anything else, Orna, before we finish up?
Well, just to finish on that, Michelle has given us a nice quote, and she thinks it's Nelson Mandela. He said, I never lose, or said, I never lose. I either win or learn. So I think that's kind of our theme. So thank you to Michelle for that quote. The only other thing I'd like to mention is the big annual planning session on the 18th of December, which I'll be doing. If anybody would like to join in that, again, we'll have the information in the show notes for that, but you can get at ornaross.com/author membership. And Margaret was asking, when will the replay of this session go out? It was a question in the comments. Margaret, as soon as we finish here, it'll be available in the Ally Forum and on the Ally page and on YouTube for you to watch immediately. And then the podcast will be available on Friday on selfpublishingadvice.org.
Fantastic. Okay, well, our January show is going to be on how to plan a creative and productive year for your author business. And we both have different kinds of planning tools, and we'll be talking about that, and also what we're both planning to do in 2021. And hopefully that will help you as well. So I guess all that remains to say is happy holiday season, wherever you are in the world and however you're celebrating. And I don't want to say let's see the end of 2020. I know a lot of people are saying let's see the back of it, but I think, you know, let's carry on living it. And 2021, I feel like it's the start of a new decade. I don't know if that's correct, but like 2021 feels like the beginning of the 2020s, really. And I'm very excited. So I think we're going to have a great year, right, Orna?
Yes, absolutely. That is our creative intention.
It is. So happy writing.
Happy publishing, and bye-bye.
Bye.